Hi, NASCAR fantasy racing fans. I'm Charlie Turner. This is Dan Beaver's NASCAR fantasy pit stop. This week we're going to talk about Sonoma Raceway, the Toyota Save Mart 350 out there at the first road course of 2014. I'm joined by fantasy racing guru Dan Beaver. Hey Dan, what's going on?
I'm just sitting here thrilled at the prospect of going road course racing.
Yeah,
Great.
me too. I mean, this is exciting stuff for me. I mean, I have always been a road course fan. All my race fan life, I guess. But we get so few of them in NASCAR. It's really a special event.
Yeah, and watching those big, heavy stock cars try to tiptoe around courses that were made for heavy downforce
Yeah,
open wheelers, it's just amazing.
that's good stuff. I get a chance to. I have not had the opportunity to go to Sonoma in person, but I have. Last year did attend the NASCAR nationwide race at Mid Ohio, and that's exactly what you're talking about. I've been to that Mid Ohio track many times, mostly watching SCCA events where you're watching, again, mostly smaller cars or open wheel cars, whatever. Nimble, more certainly cars more nimble than what we see in Nationwide Series. Negotiate the 13 or 14 turn track, and it's a blast. So I can't imagine what Sonoma would be like.
It's going to be a little interesting this year too because of the increased downforce. Is that going to help the cars stick to the track a little bit better? And will that make any difference to drivers who only race, a handful of road course races a year? I think it certainly should make a difference to the drivers who have some innate road course skills. The Jeff Gordons, the Tony Stewarts. That increased downforce should only help them.
Well, I think it'll help them get around, and I'm not so sure that it isn't. It will be interesting to see what happens, but I almost think it would be. It may cause some of these guys who have less road course talent or experience or whatever combination of that to try some things that the car really isn't capable of because they feel that extra downforce, in certain fast corners or something. And so, yeah, it's going to be going to add to it. I don't relish. I wouldn't relish your job having to predict this with that added variable going into the thing.
Road course races are never particularly easy in the first place. So, and the things that make them challenging are usually out of the driver's control, certainly out of the handicapper's control. If they get pushed off track at the wrong time, that makes them get their strategy off sequence, or if the strategy sequences are so difficult to predict for the crew chiefs, because you never know. Right after a pit stop, it's more likely when the rookies are going to make mistakes, and I would certainly be getting gray hair if I were them.
Normally, our format for this hangout, this NASCAR fantasy pit stop, is to talk about the Yahoo game in the second half of the show, and I think we probably stick with that. So looking more at fantasy calls in general, maybe salary cap type games in particular. You really only have one road course ringer going to Sonoma this year, and it's Boris Said. I would think he'd be fairly inexpensive for salary caps, right?
Yeah, he should be, and I would say that we've got 1.5 road ringers. Alex Kennedy kind of fits
Yeah,
that criteria.
yeah.
He's not in the strongest equipment, but he'll be doing the best he can. We road ringers have fallen into disrepute recently because they're not challenging for top fives. They're not challenging for top tens nearly as often. Part of that is many of those road course ringers have been in cars that were start and park operations,
Hmm.
and they would come out all the way to Sonoma or all the way up to New York and still start and park. So you really didn't know what you were going to get out of them. This year, with so few options, with such limited options, I think that Boris Said is going to be a much better value overall in all games because of that. The 32 hasn't been stellar. They're not going to challenge for a top 10. But road ringers, since they're coming on for only 2 races a year, it's kind of hard to get their salary caps right in those games. Typically, I set the salary caps for NASCAR.com for years, and before that for Fanball. the tendency is to be a little conservative because you don't want to throw someone out, a Boris Said out there at $20 and then have him finish in the mid 20s to low 30s. So yeah, they tend to be cheap. In this case, they tend to be decent values so long as they don't, something catastrophic doesn't happen to them. And that happens from time to time. They're no less prone to wrecking, making mistakes in the pits than anybody else. But they're no more prone to that either. So with 7 rookies in the lineup this week, plus some couple of sophomores, there are going to be a lot of mistakes made. And Said at least has the experience to stay on track.
Yeah, I don't want to spend the whole show talking about Boris Said because he is the main road course ringer and probably will be the most successful between him and Kennedy. But he's still going to be, that's a minor play, I would think, this week in anybody's game. But is he from a minor standpoint? Might you be better off to stay away from him because you're going to have so many people that are grabbing him because he's this so-called road course ringer? That is it a strategy play to pick somebody else?
It could be, and that's a decision you're going to have to make well before it's time for rosters to lock. The same thing's going to be true of Marcus Ambrose. You can't call him a road ringer because he's showing up at all the tracks and has run particularly well, but he's going to be on everybody's roster. Mm-hmm. So he's another driver that you might just say, okay, he might beat me, but he could wreck. Something bad could happen to him, and if it does, do I want differentiators on my roster? And you go looking for that next level of talent. The driver that might be Boris Said's biggest pick or competitor might be Justin Allgaier. It's done well in the Nationwide Series on the road courses. For Allmendinger or for Ambrose, you might have Allmendinger and Truex in his same general level. Boyer maybe even probably in a salary cap game is going to be.
Or Jamie McMurray, I would think.
Jamie McMurray is a little
well at road course tracks.
He is. He doesn't have that same current long streak of top tens that make you really want him. Since 2007, he's only had 1 top 10 on a road course. Wow. So he's got
now, see, that surprises me, but you're the expert. I have this mental picture of Jamie running up front all the time at Sonoma.
And it's why I have that.
Yeah, that's right.
So sorry,
I have this.
Probably just freaked out a lot of viewers, but hey, you've got the notes, and I tend to be a little slavishly devoted to stats or to numbers than others, but overall, the numbers tend to play out.
Yeah, I've been told that before by other self-proclaimed fantasy racing experts that it's all about the stats. So who might argue?
Yeah, it's not all about the stats, but it's I'd say it's 75-80% stats and 20% either momentum or gut work. So
yeah, right.
Intuition.
Yeah. All right. So what else are we looking at specifically up at the front of the field, up at the top of the list? Who are the guys that we would expect to do well this week, given how they've done so far in the early parts of summer?
Well, I think for road courses, you're going to pay more attention to how they run on road courses than you do any momentum that they bring to the course with them. And those are going to be the drivers that you look for to be your favorites. You've got Clint Boyer, who enters with a 4-race top 10 streak of on road courses. He won at Sonoma a couple of years back. Hasn't finished worse than 6th in the last 4 races. You got a driver like Jimmy Johnson, who has a 5-race top 10 streak on road courses. You've got a driver like Jeff Gordon, who has an 8-race top 10 streak at Sonoma. Marcus Ambrose has 5 races, top 10s. So those are going to be where you find your favorites. It is a wild card race. Things can happen. They can happen at the front of the pack. They tend to happen less at the front of the pack here than they do on some other courses, because those drivers know what they're doing and they control their own fate. So you get some pretty good streaks going on the road courses. You've got some legendary streaks of wins from drivers like Gordon and Stewart and Mark Martin back in their prime, where they get the rhythm and it seems like nothing they do goes wrong. And that's because they're running at the front of the pack.
Okay, those are the guys up front. How about the ones that we would expect normally to be finish, 15 to 25? Who are the guys to watch for there this week?
You got a number of drivers who just don't like road course racing. I think Matt Kenseth's got to fit into that group. Has never done particularly well on road courses. I think Dale Earnhardt fits in that group. He wants to be a road course racer. I think he probably enjoys it, but he doesn't quite have the skills to match up to it. Several years back at Watkins Glen, or at Pocono, the week before Watkins Glen, I asked Earnhardt a question because he was in heavy contention with Kurt Busch for the final spot in the for a position in the points, and asked him if he was worried about going to Watkins Glen because he wasn't a particularly good road course racer. And it kind of shocked him that I asked that question because he somehow was under the impression that he was a good road course racer.
He hadn't seen your book.
So after I disabused him of the notion, he said, well, points are points. You just go out there and you do the best you can. But what drivers think about themselves, you got to come to it with a positive attitude, but you also have to be realistic about how the drivers are going to run. So I'd put Earnhardt in that 20 to 25th place range. I'd put Kenseth there, certainly. Other than that, I'd probably put Murray there. Then you've got a lot of drivers that have just end up there situationally. They could, if they get the right track position, they catch the caution just right, or others don't catch the caution just right on that final one, then they're going to be in a position to score a top 10. Casey Kane, I think, has a reputation as being a relatively decent road course racer, but it's really not supported by the numbers. He's got 3 top 10s in 10 road course races, so that's another driver that. But then he won the 2009 race at Sonoma, so all bets are off if they get the right strategy call.
We mentioned Justin Allgaier earlier as a possible good pick down at the bottom of the salary cap. Any expectations for any of the other rookies that are running this year?
I think this would certainly be a good weekend to avoid Kyle Larson. If they had him racing, or if they had him driving around town with the stick shift before Pocono, he's really going to be confused as to what to do when you have to shift, downshift, turn at the same time. I think he finally got his rhythm down at Pocono. And that's the ability to confound predictions. He's so good that that there's no reason to think that he can't overcome it. But by the numbers, by the odds, I would park him. Dillon has done a little bit better on road courses than Kyle Larson, but not enough to bring him up. The other rookies, no. Probably not much expectation that they're going to run well. If they get top 20 finishes, it's going to be because they had track position late. We do have some other drivers down in their same level that could be good surprises. David Gilliland's a strong road course racer. Michael McDowell is a strong road course racer. Came out of the IMSA series, so that team. The number 95 is certainly going to be overlooked by nearly everybody, and they've got the capability of scoring a top 20.
Good stuff. Okay, well, we're about halfway through our NASCAR Fantasy Pit Stop, Joe. Let's switch and talk about the Yahoo game. That's where the action is, it seems to be. We're almost to the halfway point of the season. What drivers do you expect to be exhausted by a lot of teams? I mean, there have to be a lot of people that just play, Jimmy Johnson every week, I would think.
And see how many points they can get out of him in the first 9 or 10 races and then give up.
Yeah, they lose interest when Greg Biffle's not doing it for them.
Yeah. Oh, wait, I have to pick someone other than Jimmy Johnson? Last year, at least, you had Jimmy Johnson and Matt Kenseth. You could swap those two out, and you got half your season covered.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on. You don't see a lot of movement, mostly in Group C right now, because Larson and Dillon are such prohibitive favorites that if anybody's managing their roster, or the people that are managing the roster are also just as likely to leave one of those two on the roster and put another driver in that they can start. So then which driver that is down in Group C, there are enough choices that those two drivers stay skewed toward the high side just by being on the bench a lot. In Group A, you got to manage Group A. You got to move the drivers in and out. You know Jimmy Johnson was going to be good, but he wasn't at the beginning of this year, so that allowed some players to take him off and get some benefit from a driver like Kevin Harvick, who's been unexpectedly strong at a number of venues. Jeff Gordon is having one of the best years of his last 10, probably. So he's there. But when you come to a road course, I think the road courses are kind of like super speedways. Don't use anybody who can be a more predictable good value someplace else. Jimmy Johnson, Jeff Gordon are the drivers that I handicapped at the top of the Yahoo preview this week, but it doesn't mean that I would start them. I'd jump down and start a Clint Boyer, who has that long streak of top tens that we talked about earlier, who has won at Sonoma in the past, has 6 top tens on this track in 8 races, and then hope that this is the race that helps him turn his season around. Or a Kurt Busch, who is a really good road course racer, prone to mistakes, but he's not going to be any more prone to making a mistake this week as he is on any other track. And then you save your Gordons, your Johnsons, your Harvicks for a track for the unrestricted intermediate speedways.
Makes lots of sense. Then you've got Group B where all the meat is, right?
And in Group B, I think you've got some of those same decisions. Group B makes or breaks the Yahoo roster for the last has made or broken the Yahoo roster for the last couple of years. It's been so difficult to predict. It's been so volatile with drivers doing well and then slacking off, falling off. This year you've got Keselowski and Logano, who are going to be strong almost every place. And you've got Marcus Ambrose, who everybody's going to have on their roster. I think by the numbers, he's certainly the driver that you expect to score the most points this week. By the numbers, you're not going to exhaust him before the end of the year. He's not going to be on your roster for at least 9 times. So he's a safe pick from that standpoint. You would hate to leave points on the table and see that Ambrose has a chance to win. The other side of that coin is everybody's going to have him. You're not going to make up any ground on your competition. If you've got a lead, or if you're in a tight battle with people in your league, start Ambrose. If you're lagging behind and you really need to make up some ground, jump down and take Truex and Allmendinger. Those are the 2 drivers that are going to be somewhat unexpected. I've got them ranked 2nd and 3rd this week, or 2nd and 4th. I'm not sure exactly where I put Dinger, 2nd and 4th. But they're the ones that are going to give you the most bang for their buck, unless they have that problem that we keep talking about. So you could get top 10s out of both of those drivers, and if Ambrose only finishes around 5th, you haven't lost much. If Ambrose wins, you lost a bunch. So there's a gamble there, and you have to decide how risk averse you are as a player at this stage of the season. Good news is Watkins Glen is around the corner. Same cast of characters. Maybe you'd pull Truex out of there. He seems to be a little better at here than he is at Sonoma. But Tony Stewart could make himself fantasy relevant. He has a strong run this week. So if you make any mistakes this week, you've got Watkins Glen coming up in, 7 weeks or so, where you can make up that ground. You go down to Group C, and Larson, Dillon, don't even think about starting them this week. They're going to be so much more useful later on in the season that there's just no upside to starting them. Boris Said or Justin Allgaier would be my 2 picks down there. Said will probably be popular, except a lot of players are not managing their lead down to the C level the way they should. So if you look at it on Friday, and this is a nice week because we've got Saturday qualification, so you've got Friday to still set your roster. And if the numbers haven't climbed for Boris Said, where it looks like he's going to be on a lot of rosters, then go ahead and start him. If it has climbed to where he's on 20-25% of the rosters, you might want to overlook him and start Allgaier and expect that you're going to get a top 20, 15th to 20th probably from him, and you might get, with everything going right, an 11th to 15th out of Said. So again, it's kind of a low-risk gamble. Said might outpoint him, but not by enough to hurt you.
That's interesting. I want to go back to something you said earlier when you were talking about Tony Stewart, saying Tony Stewart could make himself fantasy relevant with a good finish here. Is Tony? He's had some good runs. He hasn't had good finishes. Is he not fantasy relevant in your mind, no matter where we are at this point?
Not overly, and not at the moment. Right now, I tweaked the numbers to get him ranked 6th this week, and the only reason to rank him that high was because of his road racing skills. His other numbers that go into my fantasy ranking formula would put him down, hovering around 12th, which is a spot that I don't profile in Group B. The good finishes that he's gotten have not been on the heels of strong runs, and you can't count on a driver being lucky every week. You can't count on them getting the strategy right every week, and that's where Tony Stewart falls right now. Plus, we talked about this in the hangout, the NASCAR hangout earlier this week. That team just seems surly. That organization seems surly.
Yes.
They are on the. It's been this way kind of all year. You keep waiting for them to explode, and they don't. Didn't expect that the organization would run as strong as it has, with Kurt Busch running well, finishing badly, Harvick running well and occasionally finishing badly. Until they calm down, I think it's kind of difficult to put any of them on your roster. Harvick sways the votes more often than not because he's been so dominant a couple of times. But you kind of wait for him to just explode in the car and make a mistake. Don't know if it'll happen, but it's one of the things you got to worry about.
Anybody else that jumps out at you at this point that you would that maybe wouldn't be an obvious choice by somebody who's not into this as much as you are, but is just somebody you don't want to pick here? I mean, is there somebody that you would have picked at Michigan, besides Matt Kenseth, okay, that you would pick this week or next week, or last week or next week, but this week you just like, no way.
I think there are probably a number of drivers that are like that, and some of them are because of strategies that we already talked about. Denny Hamlin, I think, is another driver that you pretty much want to avoid on road courses, and he's got bad luck on his side. He should be good on unrestricted intermediate speedways. Next week, going to Kentucky, you've got Kyle Busch with a win there in the recent past. You've got Hamlin with some strong runs on the unrestricted intermediate speedways, so he's a good driver to rest. McMurray's got some strong runs on unrestricted intermediate speedways, so he's a good driver to rest. Pretty much any of the people I didn't mention fit into that category of you probably don't want to start them. Brian Vickers.
So if you didn't hear their name in a positive way today, stay away.
Yeah, if there wasn't something good to say about them, then probably there's something bad to say about them on a road course.
Yeah. All right. Any other tips for tips for this time of year? We talked a little bit about managing your roster, but I don't hear a lot of that talk or see a lot of it written in the fantasy posts that I read and stuff I do here, especially the stuff on TV. You don't get that kind of strategic talk. Any other golden nuggets you want to pass on today as we go into this is what, race 15, I think.
I think this is 17.
17?
Yeah.
That's right. Michigan was 16.
16 or 17. Daytona's. I don't think of it as a halfway point too. We did Coke Zero 400, or the Firecracker 400. So
It's
we've
still
got two races
still
in.
the Firecracker 400 to me.
Yeah, me too. It's still the World 600 too, and some years back I got corrected out of that by the good folks at Turner in the background with Coke in their background,
Yeah, I bet.
sitting outside their window.
I want to bring back
Uh,
the Rebel 400. That's the one I want.
yeah, and no one wants to be wrong. So if you say that if you say to avoid a driver like Jeff Gordon, you really have to explain why on a
Right.
road course. So I try to always back things up with either numbers or strategy. And I think that's one reason that you see relatively safe picks from a lot of fantasy handicappers. Nobody wants to be wrong. This stage of the season, we're still into that heavy parity or diversity stage where we've got road courses, unrestricted intermediate speedways, flat tracks. But the only thing we don't have in the summer is a short track. So you really have to be on your A game through the summer months, and you have to make changes to your roster every week. You'll get to a point where you can place and hold drivers. Kansas and Charlotte, both the spring and the fall races are in back-to-back weeks. You can place and hold a couple of drivers there and expect them to run well. You've got Indy and Pocono in back-to-back weeks. You can kind of place and hold drivers there. But for the most part right now in this summer series, you've got to be paying close attention to your roster and know which track you're coming up on. Another good thing this week is qualifying's on Saturday. You get all the practice in before you have to make your selections. So look for drivers. You're not going to get 10-lap runs, but look for drivers who consistently have fast single laps, and those are the drivers that are going to become the favorites after Friday's practice sessions.
You know, one thing I didn't check into, and I should have done that before the show, is what's the qualifying format this week? How are they going to do it?
Short track format, 30 minutes and 10, I believe. So only two sessions. So you've got to be on your A game, and I can't imagine
that'll be interesting to watch.
Unless they blow the lap, I don't see them taking 2 to 3 laps. But a driver that blows a lap, at least they've got a chance to scrub off their tires and come back and do it again.
Right. Now it'll be interesting. It always is out at Sonoma. Hopefully the weather holds. It looks like I looked at a long range today for California for the weekend. It looks like it's going to be good. So keep our fingers crossed and get our first road course race in of the year, and hopefully people will come out with positive results for the fantasy teams by watching this show.
Yeah, and we're talking about racing in the rain from time to time. I had a good experience this morning to explain to me why NASCAR doesn't do it. I have bulk tires on my shoes, on my running shoes, and it was raining this morning, so I could barely stay on the road in the rain in shoes. So the driver's trying to do it on rain tires. I understand now. I've got a better idea of why they don't do it.
Yeah, but that nationwide race up in Montreal, when they tried to do that in the rain that one time, that was just a blast to watch. I'm sorry. I had more fun watching that than I think anything I've ever watched. I love it.
Yeah, that was fun.
I just like to see those guys that are so used to having control, having none.
Uh-huh.
You know, it's like, okay, now you know how I feel when I'm out there.
All
right, well, thanks everybody for if you joined us today or if you catch this on a replay, we appreciate it. He is, of course, Dan Beaver. Dan is the fantasy racing expert for yahoosports.com, and you can read his Yahoo game preview at yahoo.com/NASCAR, I think, or is it /fantasy, Dan? I should have put that link up here. I'm sorry. I'll put that up next week. We'll have it up.
You know, honestly, I don't know. You go to the Yahoo thing and you navigate to the fantasy section and click on auto racing.
Well, we'll have the logo on the screen next week and going forward, so everybody can know that. You can follow Dan, of course, on Twitter at Fantasy Race. If you're a fantasy racing fan, I'm sure you probably already are, but you ought to pay attention to him. Because race days and pre-race time, he has some really good nuggets on there as well. And if you want to follow me, I am on Twitter. I am on Pit Row. So on Pit Row. So thanks again. We'll be back next week to talk about Kentucky Speedway and maybe recap a little bit about what happened at Sonoma, just to see how we did. All right, man. Dan, thanks. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Lost my cursor there.